They thought she was invisible. A poor girl dragged behind a school, humiliated, threatened into silence by rich kids who believed power made them untouchable. She cried alone in the dark, certain no one would come. But someone was already running toward the truth. A Navy SEAL on leave, a loyal German shepherd at his side, and a storm of justice about to tear through a town that chose to look away. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please make sure to subscribe for more. Your support truly means the world. The storm rolled in low and sudden, heavy clouds pressing down on the small lakeside town, the air thick with rain and electricity, as if the sky itself sensed something was about to break. Ethan Cole stepped out of his truck and paused, letting the smell of wet asphalt and pine settle into his lungs, a familiar scent that should have meant safety, but didn't. He was 32, tall and broad-shouldered, built lean rather than bulky, the kind of strength forged by endurance instead of display. His dark brown hair was cut short in regulation style, threaded with a few premature gray strands that hadn't existed before his last deployment, and his face was all angles, sharp cheekbones, a squared jaw that looked permanently clenched, and a thin scar slicing through his right eyebrow, pale against weathered skin. People who met him for the first time often mistook his stillness for calm, but those who understood war knew it for what it was. Restraint, learned through years of knowing that panic killed faster than bullets. He had come home on leave with a single promise to himself. No missions, no chaos, just family. But even before he reached the front door, something inside him tightened, the old instinct whispering that peace was a fragile thing. Behind him jumped down Shadow, his German Shepherd canine partner, 5 years old, black and tan with a deep saddle marking and a dense, well-kept coat that shed rain in fine beads. Shadow moved with controlled power, head low, ears upright and constantly adjusting, eyes dark and intelligent, the kind that seemed to weigh decisions rather than react to them. He had been trained overseas, but training alone didn't explain him. Shadow possessed judgment, an uncanny ability to read Ethan's posture and breathing, to sense the difference between a false alarm and real danger, and when Ethan's shoulders stiffened now, Shadow mirrored the change instantly, muscles coiling beneath his fur. "This is home," Ethan muttered, more to himself than the dog, and Shadow's tail gave a slow, single wag while his gaze swept the street. Ethan had planned this leave carefully. 2 weeks to make up for missed birthdays, missed graduations, missed moments that didn't wait for soldiers. But the thought barely finished forming before his phone vibrated in his hand. Unknown number. He frowned, answered without ceremony. "Cole." Static crackled. Breathing came fast and uneven, and then a familiar voice, thin with fear, broke through. "Ethan?" His spine went rigid. "Mia?" he said, and Shadow's head snapped up. Mia was 19, his kid sister, taller now than the girl he remembered, stubborn in a way that made him smile and worry in equal measure. I don't know where I am," she whispered. "I was leaving tutoring, and then I think they followed me." Her words fractured, swallowed by a sharp intake of breath. "Ethan, I'm scared." He kept his voice level by force alone. "Slow down. Where are you right now?" "I don't know. Behind the school. The lights." A sound like fabric tearing brushed the microphone, a muffled sob followed, and then the line went dead. Ethan lowered the phone slowly, the world narrowing to a single point of focus, his heartbeat oddly distant, like it belonged to someone else. This wasn't panic. It was the moment before violence, the calm that settled right before everything went wrong. Shadow growled low and controlled, the sound he made when a line had been crossed. Across town, Amelia Cole glanced at the crooked clock above the diner's coffee machine. 8:47 p.m., and felt unease curl in her stomach. Amelia was 48, average height, slender in a way shaped by long hours on her feet rather than intention, her brown hair streaked with silver and pulled into a practical bun. Her face carried lines, but they spoke of endurance rather than age, and her eyes were sharp, watchful, the eyes of someone who had learned early that attention was a form of survival. She wiped her hands on her apron, checked her phone again, and frowned. Mia always texted. She opened her Notes app and began typing times and details, glancing up at the security camera above the register, memorizing its angle and timestamp. Habits formed by years of being ignored and understanding that memories alone were never enough when power decided not to listen. At the high school, Hannah Price stood frozen near the bleachers, 18 and slight, her light brown hair slipping into her eyes no matter how often she tucked it back, oversized sweater hanging from narrow shoulders as if she were trying to disappear inside it. Her hands shook around her backpack straps as she watched 3 boys circle Mia, boys with clean clothes and easy confidence, the kind that came from knowing consequences rarely reached them. Hannah knew that tone when one of them laughed and said, "Relax, we just want to talk." She had heard it before, had been warned afterward in quiet messages that said speaking up would ruin her life, and fear locked her feet to the ground now as Mia's phone slipped from her hand and her eyes searched for an exit that wasn't there. Hannah took 1 step forward, then stopped, heart hammering, shame and terror tangling together. Back on Ethan's street, rain began to fall in the heavy drops as he whistled once, sharp and precise, and Shadow was at his side instantly. "Track," Ethan said, voice low. "Find her." Shadow's nose dropped to the ground, muscles tightening as he inhaled deeply, rain beating on his coat, and then he surged forward with confidence, "Podemite," pulling the leash taut. Ethan followed without hesitation. Every step fueled by a single, relentless thought, the promise he had made on the plane home shattering under the weight of reality. He had come back expecting rest, but the storm had chosen his family, and he was already moving toward it. Mia came home just before midnight, not walking so much as being guided through the doorway by Ethan's steady hand at her elbow, her body rigid, eyes unfocused, rainwater streaking down her hoodie as if the storm had followed her inside. The porch light cast a harsh yellow over her face, revealing a bruise blooming along her cheekbone and faint marks on her forearms where fingers had gripped too hard, and Ethan felt something inside him lock into place with the cold precision of a chambered round. Mia was 19, slim and long-limbed, her dark hair usually worn loose and defiant now clinging in damp strands to her face, her shoulders hunched inward as if trying to fold herself smaller. She had always been expressive, quick to argue, quicker to laugh, but now her mouth opened and closed without sound, breath shallow, gaze skittering away from every sudden noise. Shadow pressed close to her left side the moment she crossed the threshold, the German shepherd's body angled protectively, ears upright and swiveling, a low, vibrating growl rumbling in his chest whenever the wind rattled the windows, not loud enough to frighten her, just enough to warn whatever hunted in the dark that it had been seen. Ethan shut the door and locked it, then checked the deadbolt twice, a habit from places where doors meant little. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped beneath his beard shadow, the stubble dark against skin weathered by sun and dust. "You're safe," he said, keeping his voice even, the way he spoke to men in shock, to civilians after blasts, to himself on bad nights. Mia nodded once but didn't look at him. She stared at the floor, at the scuffed wood near the mat, at the place where Shadow's paws left faint wet prints, and whispered, "I thought I was," as if admitting a mistake rather than fear. Amelia appeared from the hallway without drama, her movements efficient, her posture straight despite the late hour and the weight pressing on her chest. She took in the scene in a single glance, the torn seam at Mia's sleeve, the tremor in her hands, the way Ethan's shoulders squared, and then she moved, placing a gentle palm between Mia's shoulder blades. "Bathroom," she said softly, not a question, guiding her daughter away with practiced calm. Amelia did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears could wait. She was of average height, her frame wiry, her brown hair streaked with silver pulled into a bun that never loosened at work, and her eyes, sharp and observant, missed nothing. In the bathroom, steam rose as she turned on the shower, the sound a shield against the world, and she helped Mia out of her clothes without commentary, folding each piece carefully, noting stains, tears, the smell of damp grass and metal. Ethan hovered in the doorway until Amelia met his gaze and shook her head once, a quiet boundary. He backed away, his hands flexing at his sides, Shadow remaining planted outside the bathroom, lying down but alert, chin on paws, eyes fixed on the door. Amelia moved through the ritual with methodical care, rinsing mud from Mia's skin, speaking in low, neutral tones about ordinary things, the water temperature, the towel's warmth, while her mind cataloged evidence the way she'd learned to do after years of being overlooked by systems that favored louder voices. When the shower ended, she wrapped Mia in a clean robe, guided her to sit, and gently examined the bruises, taking photographs with her phone under steady light, angling for clarity, then sealed the wet clothes in a clean bag, knotted tight, and set it on the counter. "This stays," she said simply, as if the bag were a promise. Mia nodded, tears finally spilling, silent and relentless, her shoulders shaking as the weight of the night pressed down now that motion had stopped. Ethan stood in the kitchen with his back to the counter, listening to the muffled sounds through the wall, the clink of glass as he poured water, the tick of the clock, the soft huff of Shadow's breathing. He felt the old switch flip, the one that narrowed choices and sharpened edges, and he hated it for how familiar it felt. He wanted to break something, someone, but he forced his hands to stillness, remembering all the times rage had been a liability. When Maya emerged, wrapped in the robe, eyes red but steadier, he crouched to her level, keeping his movements slow. "Tell me what you can," he said. "When you're ready." She swallowed, fingers knotting in the fabric. "They waited," she said, "by the bleachers. They knew my schedule." She didn't say names, not yet, and he didn't push. Shadow lifted his head, ears forward, a soft whine escaping before he stilled, pressing his flank against her shin. The phone on the counter buzzed, and Mia flinched so hard she nearly dropped her glass. Ethan took the device before she could see the screen, heart rate spiking. Unknown sender. A message preview glowed. "I saw them pull you back there. I'm sorry. I'm scared." Ethan showed it to Amelia, who read it once and nodded, then handed the phone back to Mia. "Answer if you want," Amelia said. "You don't have to." Mia hesitated, then typed with shaking thumbs. "Who is this?" The reply came quickly. "Hannah. I can't say more. They watch." Ethan's jaw tightened. Hannah Price, he recalled, a girl from Mia's class he'd seen once at a school event, slight, always hovering near exits. He moved to the window and scanned the street, the rain washing everything into gray, neighbors' houses dark, the town holding its breath. Amelia placed the phone face down. "One thing at a time," she said. "Tonight we breathe." She set tea to steep, hands steady, her calm a quiet rebellion against the chaos. Mia leaned into Shadow's warmth, eyes finally closing for a moment, and the dog shifted to support her weight, the way he'd learned to do for wounded men. Ethan watched them, the domestic scene painfully fragile, and made a decision he did not voice yet. The truth was in the room, thick and suffocating, but it needed air, and air took time. The message from Hannah was a spark, and sparks could become fires if handled right. For now, Ethan stayed where he was, between the door and his family, listening to the storm fade, knowing this chapter ended not with answers, but with the first proof that they were not alone. Ethan drove with both hands locked on the wheel, knuckles pale, the road to the police station familiar in a way that made his skin itch, while Mia sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead and Amelia rode in back, posture upright, eyes moving, cataloging. The station squatted at the edge of downtown, brick darkened by decades of rain, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly like insects trapped in glass. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and floor cleaner, and a man behind the desk looked up with practiced boredom. Sergeant Paul Miller was in his mid-40s, thick through the neck and shoulders, hair clipped too short on the sides as if to mimic discipline he didn't possess, a trimmed mustache sitting above a mouth that curled into a half-smile whenever he sensed leverage. His uniform was neat but worn, creased at the elbows, a gold wedding band flashing as he set his pen down. He glanced from Ethan to Mia and back again, eyes lingering just long enough to weigh social standing. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, voice smooth, the kind that slid around the edges of truth. Ethan explained without embellishment, keeping his tone clipped, facts only, while Shadow lay at his heel, body still, ears tracking every sound. Miller nodded along, then leaned back, chair creaking. "That's a serious claim," he said, lowering his voice. "You sure there wasn't a misunderstanding? Kids, parties, things get complicated." Mia flinched. Ethan felt the heat climb his spine. "We'd like to file a report," Amelia said from behind them, calm as stone. Miller sighed theatrically and motioned them to a side counter, passing a form across with 2 fingers. The questions that followed came wrapped in politeness but cut like wire. What was she wearing? Had she been drinking? Why hadn't she screamed? Did she know the boys? Each time Ethan's jaw tightened, Miller glanced at his name patch and smirked. "Look," he added finally, tapping the desk, "those families carry weight around here. Pushing this without proof could make life hard. For everyone." It wasn't a threat exactly. It was a suggestion delivered by a man who knew the difference mattered little. Ethan stared at him, measuring angles, exits, the way he'd been trained to do, and understood with sick clarity that the law here wasn't broken. It was owned. They left with a case number written too lightly, the paper already feeling thin. Outside, rain began again, soft and persistent. Amelia exhaled once. "We did what we could here," she said. Ethan nodded, already shifting gears in his head. Back at the diner, the night crowd swelled, the bell above the door chiming with each arrival. Amelia tied on her apron and stepped behind the counter, her movements economical, her ears open. The talk came quickly, as it always did, floating between coffee refills and pie. "Did you hear about that girl?" a man in a ball cap said, voice carrying. "Whole thing's a mess. Probably just a misunderstanding." A woman with manicured nails shook her head. "Kids these days. Always drama." Amelia poured, smiled, listened. On the TV mounted above the grill, a local news segment played on loop, the anchor's voice carefully neutral as a blurred image of the high school appeared. "Police say they are reviewing an incident involving students," the chyron read, the words chosen like padding. No names, no urgency. Amelia noticed a black sedan pull into the lot, watched a uniformed officer step out. Officer Dean Russo. Late 30s, lean, sharp-featured, hair combed back with gel, the type who spoke loudly and tipped loudly too. Russo slid into a booth and ordered without looking up, leaving a folded bill on the table before his plate arrived. Amelia clocked the denomination, the time, the car's plates, the way Russo glanced at the TV and snorted. "Kids," he muttered to no one. Amelia wiped the counter, committing details to memory the way others memorized prayers. At school the next morning, Hannah Price felt the walls closing in. The hallway buzzed with lockers slamming and laughter that scraped raw. Hannah moved with her head down, sweater sleeves pulled over her hands when her phone vibrated. A photo filled the screen. Her house, taken from across the street, porch light on. Beneath it, a message blinked into place. "Keep quiet." Her breath hitched, vision narrowing. Hannah was slight, barely 5 feet tall, with a nervous habit of chewing her lip until it bled. She had learned to read danger in silence, in the way eyes followed and smiles lingered. She shoved the phone into her pocket and nearly collided with the boy blocking her path. He was tall, broad, clean-cut, wearing a jacket with a stitched logo that meant status in this town. He smiled without warmth. "You okay?" he asked, voice syrupy. Hannah nodded too fast and slipped away, heart pounding, the message echoing louder than the bells. At home, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the bagged clothes laid out beside him like evidence on a battlefield tarp. He didn't touch them. He studied. Shadow paced once, then settled, chin on paws, eyes never leaving the front window. Amelia returned from her shift with a paper sack of receipts and a notepad filled edge to edge. She laid them out without ceremony. "Same officer, same booth, same car," she said quietly, "and the news segment aired 3 times tonight. Same words." Ethan absorbed it, his mind mapping connections. The phone on the table buzzed again. Mia this time, a message forwarded from an unknown number. "They know where I live," it read, followed by a screenshot of Hannah's photo. Mia's hands shook as she passed the phone over. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're testing fear." He stood and locked the doors again, checked the windows, the perimeter instinctively tightening. Later, he called the station, not to report but to listen, memorizing the way Miller answered, the cadence, the casual dismissal. When he hung up, the decision was already made. He would stop asking a town that pretended not to hear. He would listen instead, to patterns, to money, to the silence between words. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the streets glossy and reflective, and somewhere between the diner's hum and the school's fluorescent glare, the town kept its secrets, convinced it could outweight the truth. Ethan wasn't convinced. Night folded itself over the school grounds with a damp hush, the rain finally easing into a fine mist that slicked the grass and softened every footfall, and Ethan parked a block away to avoid the cameras he now assumed were watched as closely as the hallways. He moved with Shadow at his side, leash loose, posture unremarkable to anyone who might glance from a passing car, though every line of Ethan's body was tuned tight, his eyes skimming shadow and light the way they had learned to do in places where darkness hid more than night. The bleachers loomed ahead like ribs, metal steps beaded with moisture, the floodlights long since killed, and the air carried the smell of wet iron and cut grass. "Find it," Ethan murmured, not loud enough to carry, and Shadow's nose dropped instantly. The German shepherd's shoulders rolling as he worked, tail level, ears pricked forward. Shadow was 5, in his prime, black and tan coat darkened by damp, eyes intent and patient. He moved in short, efficient arcs, inhaling, sorting, discarding, until a change rippled through him. His pace slowed, his head angled left, and he pulled gently toward the fence line. Ethan followed without question, counting steps, memorizing angles, noting where footprints had scuffed the mud into darker patches. Shadow stopped near a strip of grass, flattened as if by hurried shoes, pawed once, then twice, and nosed aside a clump of wet blades to reveal a dull gleam. Ethan crouched, breath shallow, and used a pen from his pocket to nudge the object free without touching it. It was small and heavy, a cufflink by the look of it, gold-toned and solid, engraved with a set of initials neat enough to suggest money rather than taste. The metal was cold even through the pen's plastic, and Ethan felt the weight of it settle into the moment like a hinge finding its pin. "Good," he said quietly, not praise so much as confirmation, and Shadow sat back on his haunches, alert, gaze flicking to the tree line as if to say the night was still listening. Ethan photographed the cufflink in place, then bagged it carefully, sealing the plastic with a practiced press. His movements precise, unhurried. This wasn't a victory, just a foothold, but footholds were how walls came down. Across town, Amelia parked 2 houses away from Hannah Price's place and walked the rest of the distance, hands empty, posture open, the way she had learned to approach frightened animals and frightened people alike. Hannah's house was modest, paint peeling near the porch rail, one light glowing behind a thin curtain, and when the door opened a crack, Hannah's mother peered out, a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and a wary set to her mouth. "I'm Amelia Cole," Amelia said gently, "Mia's mother." The door opened a little wider. Inside, Hannah hovered near the hallway, small and tense, sweater sleeves pulled over her hands, hair falling into her eyes. Amelia didn't rush. She asked to sit, accepted a chair at the kitchen table, noticed the way Hannah's foot bounced beneath the table, and the phone lay face down between them like a threat. "I won't ask you to say anything you don't want to," Amelia said, voice steady. "I only want you to know you're not alone." Hannah swallowed, eyes darting to the window, then back. "They took a picture of my house," she whispered. "They said if I talked, they'd make things worse." Amelia nodded once, acknowledging fear without feeding it. "If you don't want to be seen, you don't have to be," she said. "If you don't want to write, you can speak. We can record it. No names." Hannah's shoulders loosened a fraction. She nodded, fingers trembling as she slid her phone across the table. Amelia placed her own phone beside it, turned on the recorder, and let the silence stretch until Hannah filled it. "Mia saw something," Hannah said, words tumbling now that they'd started. Before they pulled her back. They were in the study room by the gym, laughing, crowded around a laptop. There was a map on the screen, with the lines drawn through the north end of town. One of them said, "If this leaks, we're dead." When Mia asked what it was, they slammed it shut. Later, they followed her. Hannah's voice broke, then steadied. "They said she shouldn't stick her nose where it doesn't belong." Amelia didn't interrupt. She watched Hannah's breathing, waited for the rhythm to settle, then asked softly, "Did you recognize the lines?" Hannah nodded. "It looked like a new access road, cutting through the old blocks. My uncle works zoning. He mentioned something about a resort." Amelia stopped the recording and slid the phone back. "That's enough," she said. "You've done enough." Hannah's mother exhaled a breath she'd been holding, tears shining without falling. "Will this make it worse?" she asked. Amelia met her gaze. "It will make it harder for them to hide," she said, honest without being cruel. Back at the school, Ethan completed a slow circuit, noting cameras, blind spots, the places where shadows pooled, then returned to the car with Shadow at heel. He didn't leave right away. He sat, engine off, hands resting on the wheel, replaying Hannah's words, overlaying them on the map of town in his head, on the cufflink in the bag on the seat. Money left marks, and maps meant intent. The leap from intimidation to planning felt ugly, but familiar. When he reached home, Amelia was already there, the recorder file saved and backed up twice, her face composed, but eyes alight with purpose. They spoke in low tones, trading pieces without flourish. Ethan placed the bag on the table. Amelia didn't touch it. "That's real," she said. "It will matter." Mia listened from the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, Shadow pressed to her side, his presence a steady warmth. "They wanted me quiet," she said, not as a question. Ethan nodded. "They wanted time." He knelt to her level. "They don't have it." Later, when the house finally stilled, Ethan stepped outside with Shadow. The night cooler now, the rain washed clean, and looked up at a sky clearing in patches. He sent a single text to a number he hadn't used in years. No details, just a question about zoning and shell companies, and put the phone away. The truth had a scent, and once found, it didn't fade easily. Ethan turned the garage into a temporary operations room before dawn. The concrete floor swept clean. A folding table dragged under the single bulb. Extension cords snaking like veins toward a laptop and two scavenged monitors. He worked in silence, jacket off, sleeves rolled, forearms marked by old scars that spoke of places where decisions had cost blood. His face looked harder in this light. Angles sharpened, stubble dark, eyes steady and unblinking. Yet his movements were meticulous, almost gentle, as if patience itself were a weapon. Shadow lay just inside the open door, 5 years old and alert, black and tan coat catching the glow, ears flicking toward every passing car. He rose only when Ethan shifted, mirroring the change with quiet intent. Ethan pulled traffic feeds first, mapping the school's perimeter, noting the rhythm of cameras that blinked blind at regular intervals, then cross-referenced them with the security roster he'd obtained by asking the right question to the right tired guard at the right hour. Names turned into schedules. Schedules turned into gaps. He scraped social media next. building a web of connections, likes, tagged photos, noise at first, then patterns. One name kept recurring, not loud, not flashy, but threaded through land charity galas and ribbon cuttings like a watermark: Thomas Reed. Reed was late 40s, clean-shaven, silver at the temples, always photographed with an arm around someone else's shoulder, smile practiced and philanthropic, the kind of man whose suits fit too well to be accidental. Ethan followed the money from Reed's foundation to a consulting firm with no storefront and a mailbox in another county, then from there into zoning approvals that bent the map Hannah had described. The cursor paused. Ethan's jaw set. "There you are," he murmured, not satisfaction so much as confirmation. In the house, Amelia laced her shoes and stepped into the morning with a different kind of resolve. She didn't carry papers or devices this time, only a tote with a thermos and a notebook, and she moved through the labor blocks with the familiarity of someone who belonged. She knocked on doors that had learned not to answer and waited when the chain stayed on, her posture open, voice soft. At the third apartment, she met Sarah Morales, a woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes and a posture bent by vigilance, hair pulled into a low ponytail streaked with early gray. Sarah's hands shook as she poured coffee, her apartment sparse and meticulously clean. "We moved schools last year," Sarah said after a long pause. "They called it an accident. My daughter stopped sleeping." Amelia listened, nodding, never interrupting, and when Sarah's voice cracked, Amelia didn't rush to fill the space. "If you stay quiet," Amelia said finally, "they don't stop hunting. They just pick another girl." Sarah stared into her cup, jaw working, then nodded once, the decision costing her something visible. Back in the garage, Ethan's phone buzzed. Hannah's name. He answered immediately. Her voice was steadier than before, but fear threaded it. "They're watching my house," she said. Ethan looked at Shadow, who had risen without command, ears forward. "We can protect you," Ethan said, voice level, cold as steel. "You'll have options. You won't be alone." There was a breath on the line, then, "Okay." He hung up and sent a single message to a contact whose name he never saved. A man with a shaved head and a permanent squint earned under desert suns, now working compliance for a firm that liked secrets. Zoning anomalies, Shell Consulting, Reed Foundation, Ethan typed. Need eyes. In the afternoon, Amelia returned with notes and names, a small constellation of quiet stories orbiting the same gravity. Ethan slid a printed chart across the table, lines drawn, arrows connecting. They stood shoulder to shoulder, not touching, the way people do when the work matters. "He thinks philanthropy makes him invisible," Ethan said. Amelia nodded. "It makes him predictable." The sun dipped. The garage bulb hummed. Hannah arrived after dark, escorted by her mother, both pale and determined. Ethan met them at the door, Shadow stepping forward, posture calm but unmistakably protective. Hannah knelt without thinking and pressed her hand to the dog's chest, fingers curling into fur, breathing easing. "He stays," Ethan said. "So do I." The hunt had split into two, moving in parallel, Data tightening its net, Hearts finding their courage, and, for the first time since the storm, the night felt like it might give ground. Ethan chose the moment carefully, the way he always did when pressure mattered more than force. He didn't go after the loudest boy or the one who laughed the hardest. He went after Caleb Monroe, the quiet one who stood half a step behind the others, the one whose confidence evaporated the moment authority wasn't present to prop it up. Caleb was 18, narrow-shouldered with a perpetual stoop, pale skin that never seemed to tan, hair cut too neat by a mother who still made his appointments. He lived under the long shadow of his father, a mid-level developer who barked orders at home and wrote checks elsewhere, and that upbringing had left Caleb compliant, fearful, desperate to belong. Ethan met him at the edge of the public park near dusk, not alone, but not theatrical either, shadow at heel, calm and watchful. "I'm not here to hurt you," Ethan said, voice flat, holding Caleb's gaze without blinking. "I'm here to end this." Caleb's eyes darted to the dog, to Ethan's hands, to the folder Ethan set on the bench between them. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough, of the cufflink found by the bleachers, still smeared with wet grass. Stills from traffic cameras showing cars circling the school that night. Timestamps that aligned too neatly to dismiss. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply laid the facts down like weights, one by one, and waited. Caleb's breathing went shallow. "I didn't touch her," he blurted. Ethan nodded once. "That's not what I asked." The silence stretched, punctured only by a distant siren and the soft scrape of Shadow's nails as he shifted, ears forward. Caleb's shoulders sagged. "They said it was a joke," he whispered. "They said she saw something she shouldn't." Ethan leaned back, giving space, the way he'd learned to do in interrogations when a person needed room to fall apart. "Who said?" he asked. Caleb swallowed. "Reed's kid. And Mark. They told us to scare her, make sure she kept quiet." The words came faster now, tumbling, fear overriding loyalty. "They said the cops were covered, that nothing would stick." Ethan slid a recorder across the bench. "Say it again," he said. Caleb hesitated, then spoke, the truth cracking free in uneven shards. Across town, Amelia executed her own move, quieter, but no less decisive. She sat at the kitchen table with a single envelope addressed in careful block letters to a journalist in the next county, a woman named Elaine Porter, known for patience and an unglamorous insistence on documents. Elaine was in her early 50s, tall and spare, hair cropped silver, eyes sharp behind thin frames, a reporter who had learned after years of being iced out that truth traveled better with receipts. Amelia enclosed copies, never originals, of the cufflink photos, the anonymized witness statement, the zoning map lines Hannah had described, and a brief cover note. Evidence. Protect the names. Call if you need more. She sent a second packet to a nonprofit advocacy group specializing in coercion and retaliation cases, the kind that understood how bullying became a shield word for organized harm. She didn't call ahead. She didn't explain. She trusted the weight of paper to speak for itself. In the school hallway the next morning, Hannah's hands shook as she pressed record on her phone, heart hammering against her ribs. She was cornered by lockers, the metal cold against her back when a voice she recognized leaned in close, low, and menacing. "Delete whatever you have," the voice said, "or your mom loses her job." Hannah kept her eyes down, nodded, and let the threat pour itself into the microphone. When she escaped, she didn't run. She walked, each step an act of defiance that surprised her with its steadiness. She sent the file to Ethan with a single word. Now. By afternoon, the first tremors hit. A local editor called Amelia, voice tight, asking questions that weren't scripted. A patrol car idled too long outside the Monroe house, then moved on. Ethan listened to Caleb's recording twice, then sealed it, labeling the file with the same care he used for evidence downrange. He called his off-the-books contact again. This time, the reply came quick. Reed, consulting flagged. Shell trail confirmed. The net tightened. That evening, Caleb called, panic raw. "They know," he said. Ethan didn't comfort him. "Tell the truth," he said. "It's the only thing that works now." Shadow stood between them when they met again, posture neutral, presence undeniable. The boy talked. The system, built on silence and confidence, began to creak. It wasn't a collapse yet, just the sound of stress finding its seams. But Ethan recognized it. He'd heard it before, right before structures failed. The morning broke with a brightness that felt almost accusatory, the kind of clear light that left nowhere to hide. And by the time Ethan finished his coffee, the street outside had learned a new posture. Cars slowing, curtains twitching, conversations dropping mid-sentence. The knock came at 9, firm but measured, and when Ethan opened the door, he found two people who did not belong to the town's rhythm. Special Agent Laura Chen stood slightly forward, mid-40s, tall and composed, her black hair pulled into a severe bun that emphasized a calm, analytical face. She wore a navy blazer that hung just loose enough to signal movement over vanity, and her eyes had the steady patience of someone used to listening longer than others could endure. Beside her was Agent Marcus Hale, early 50s, broader, salt-and-pepper beard trimmed close, shoulders squared by years of carrying responsibility, his demeanor direct without being abrasive. "We're here regarding an ongoing investigation," Chen said, tone neutral, producing credentials with an economy of motion. "We'll need to speak with you, and we'll need the materials you referenced." Ethan stepped aside without ceremony, Shadow sitting at his heel, posture neutral but attentive, ears flicking once at the new voices. The agents noticed the dog, noticed the garage setup through the open side door, and exchanged a glance that said they'd seen worse and better both. Inside, the transfer was clean. Copies only, chain of custody notes meticulous, recordings logged with times and sources protected. Chen asked questions that cut to structure rather than gossip. Hale tracked answers with a pen that never paused. And when Ethan finished, Chen nodded once. "This moves out of local jurisdiction," she said, "effective immediately." The word immediately carried weight. At the police station, that weight landed hard. Uniforms stiffened as federal observers took seats, quiet and watchful, clipboards out, expressions unreadable. Sergeant Miller's practiced ease evaporated. Sweat darkened his collar as phones were surrendered and desks opened. Data forensics teams, young, focused, dressed in unassuming sweaters, rolled carts past the familiar walls, cables threading into machines that hummed softly as if whispering secrets back to themselves. Summons went out. Cars with good plates arrived at the curb, engines idling too long. The first of the boys arrived with a lawyer whose tie was too bright for the room, the second with a father whose smile failed to assemble. The third did not arrive at all at first, then appeared late, eyes red, hands shaking. Phones were bagged, accounts were mirrored. Texts bloomed on screens like time-lapse flowers, ugly and undeniable. Across town, Amelia felt the turn before she saw it. The diner buzzed louder than usual, voices sharpened by opinion, and when someone muttered her daughter's name with the old, lazy cruelty, Amelia set the pot down and faced the room. She was average height, slim, hair streaked with silver catching the light, shoulders back in a posture she had practiced in mirrors after long shifts. "My daughter didn't do anything wrong by being alive," she said, not shouting, not peepaw pleading. "If that offends you, sit with it." The room went still, then split. Some eyes dropped, some hardened, some softened with relief. Outside, a camera flashed. A blogger with more followers than scruples raised a phone. Amelia didn't flinch. She took Mia's hand and left. By afternoon, the town had divided itself into whispers and lines. On one side, people clung to the comfort of old hierarchies. On the other, a fragile, growing certainty that power had overreached. Ethan watched the scales tip in small ways. Neighbors who nodded where they hadn't before, a contractor who canceled a donation gala pending review, a school board member who declined comment and then declined re-election. Hannah slept for the first time in days without jolting awake. She was under protection now, her mother's car replaced by a gray sedan that never parked in the same place twice. Routines shifted with care. The relief softened her face, revealing a steadiness she hadn't known she possessed, and with that steadiness came memory. She called Ethan in the afternoon. "There's someone else," she said. "Sophia." Sophia Alvarez was 20, taller than Hannah, with a long dancer's build and a scar along her left forearm she covered with bracelets. She wore her dark hair in a loose braid and carried herself with a wary grace learned too young. She had left school the year before, citing family reasons, and moved between jobs without staying long. When Hannah found her, Sophia listened in silence, jaw tight, eyes fixed on a point beyond the window. "They said if I stayed, they'd make sure my scholarship disappeared," Sophia said finally, voice even. the calm of someone who had rehearsed fear until it dulled. So I left. She agreed to speak, on record, and when she did, the story broke its bounds. It wasn't one incident anymore. It was a pattern. The agents moved faster after that. Warrants expanded. A zoning office was visited. A consulting firm's servers went dark. Reed's name appeared on documents that didn't like daylight, and when he smiled for a camera that evening, it cracked at the edges. At sunset, federal vehicles lined the square like punctuation, not aggressive, just present, and the message landed. The rules had changed. Ethan stood at the edge of it all with Shadow beside him, the dog's gaze tracking movement with calm intelligence, and felt the familiar mix of relief and vigilance. This was the day flares went up, not an ending, but a signal seen far beyond town limits that silence had failed. The system, stressed and exposed, began to shed the weight it had hidden behind. The courthouse smelled of old paper and lemon polish, a quiet gravity settling into the wooden benches as if the building itself understood the weight it was about to carry. Ethan sat in the second row, shoulders squared but hands open on his knees, the posture of a man who had learned when to be still. He wore a dark jacket that fit close across his frame, the angles of his face softened only by a night without sleep, and beside him Shadow lay with a disciplined calm, 5 years old and steady, black and tan coat brushed to a subdued sheen. The dog's presence drew eyes, not because he moved, but because he did not. His silence made a promise the room could feel. Mia sat just ahead, back straight, chin lifted, her hands folded together in her lap to keep them from shaking. She wore a simple dress and a resolve she had stitched together from fear and truth, and when she glanced back, Ethan met her eyes once, a wall not to hide behind but to lean against. Amelia took the aisle seat, posture upright, hair streaked with silver pinned neatly back, the lines of her face set with a calm that came from deciding not to flinch anymore. The judge entered, a middle-aged woman with a composed expression and eyes that had learned to separate noise from fact, and the room rose and settled again like a single breath. The prosecutor spoke plainly, laying the structure of the case without flourish, and the defense tried for smoke, suggesting misunderstandings, youthful excess, misremembered nights. But the air had changed since those words once worked. Evidence entered cleanly. The cufflink photographed where it lay, the camera stills that aligned too precisely to dismiss, the financial threads that turned coincidence into design. Hannah testified first, slight shoulders squared, voice steady despite the tremor that flickered and faded as she spoke. She described the threats in the hallway, the words spoken close to her ear, the recording played in the room like a bell rung once and never unheard. Sophia followed, taller, braid resting against her back, scar peeking from beneath bracelets she finally removed. She spoke of a scholarship leveraged into silence, of leaving school to survive, of how fear had taught her to pack her life into boxes. When Mia stood, the room tightened. She did not rush. She told the truth without adjectives, the way Ethan had taught her to breathe, what she saw, what was said, what followed, and when the defense tried to bend her words, the judge's raised hand stopped the turn. Shadow did not move, but his eyes tracked the exchange, and something about that steadiness made the sneer fall from a face that had worn it too easily before. The verdict came with a gravity that felt earned, and when it did not feel like a cheer or a collapse. It felt like a door closing on a long, loud room. Outside, cameras waited, but Amelia stepped forward first, shoulders back. "My daughter was not wrong to live," she said, voice calm. "No one is." She did not stay to argue. In the weeks that followed, Amelia took the donations she never asked for and the legal aid offered by people who had been watching quietly, and she formed a small fund. Nothing grand, just enough to help other girls find counsel and therapy without choosing between rent and recovery. She worked evenings with the same efficiency she'd always had, but now there was a ledger on the kitchen table, names and appointments, and a sense of direction that didn't ask permission. Hannah slept without lights on for the first time in months. Sophia enrolled in night classes and found a therapist whose office smelled like lavender and safety. The school announced changes. Lighting, staffing, reporting protocols, words on paper made real by the knowledge that someone would now be watching. Mia began therapy, slow and patient, learning that healing was not a straight line but a series of honest steps. She joined a support group, spoke when she could, rested when she couldn't, and discovered that voice returned in increments. On a clear afternoon, Ethan and Shadow walked the field where the bleachers once stood, now quiet and ordinary again, and Ethan felt the familiar pull of duty loosen without snapping. He had not fought in court. He had stood, and in standing, he had learned a different strength. The fire that remained was not rage but vigilance, warm enough to light a path, contained enough not to burn the hand that held it. Sometimes the miracle does not arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes it comes quietly, through truth spoken when fear says stay silent, through love that refuses to step aside, through a strength that stands still instead of striking back. God does not always remove the storm, but He gives us the courage to walk through it together. In everyday life, injustice may look small, ordinary, or hidden, yet every act of truth, every hand that protects the vulnerable, becomes a spark of light. If this story touched your heart, share it so that light can travel further. Leave a comment to let others know they are not alone. Subscribe to this channel so more stories of hope and justice can be told. May God bless you, watch over your family, and give you strength in the moments when you need it most.